Hi there. In this video, we're going to be looking at operations processes, more specifically looking at transformation processes and the influence of volume, variety, variation in demand, and visibility. So the 4 V's. So we'll start with volume. Firstly, volume, strictly speaking, is really just how much of a product is made. Okay, so if they're making 10, if they're making 20, if they're making 1,000,000, if they're making 100,000, strictly how much is actually being made. Now, when it comes to how quickly the business, the transformation process can adjust to either an increase or a decrease in demand, that's known as volume flexibility. So how flexible are they if all of a sudden there's a spike in demand? How quickly can they get more supplies, get more raw materials, get more workers in order to meet that that spike in demand? On the offside as well, it's looking at if there's a decrease in demand, well, how quickly can they get onto their supplies and slow down shipments and slow down the orders so they don't have too much in stock? Now, lead time is the time it takes for an order to be fulfilled from the moment it is made. So the minute, let's say, a department store calls up a business and says, we want 1,000 green t-shirts, from that moment up until the moment that that department store opens up the boxes that contain those t-shirts, that is known as lead time. How long it takes for an order to be fulfilled, so finished, from the moment it is made. Now that leads into the flexibility. As I mentioned before, if they're not flexible enough, okay, so they could either overproduce, so if all of a sudden demand goes down but they're still producing at their current rate, well then it leads to wastage, okay, and as we know, waste equals costs. Okay, they're wasting too much resources. Or if all of a sudden there's a demand increase and they're still producing at the current rate, well, they can then underproduce. Okay, so they're not keeping up with demand. They can actually lose sales, and lost sales equals lost revenue, meaning that they're losing money. Okay, so that volume flexibility and lead time really work hand in hand, because if there's a spike or a decrease in demand, they need to adjust their lead time basically to make sure that they're fulfilling the orders as quickly as they can, and being flexible in that regard. The second V is variety. So this is the mix of products, the variety of products or services that is actually delivered through the transformations process. Now, the greater the variety, so the more different variations in products that are made, the more they actually need to allow for variation. Now, that's when it becomes a bit more expensive as well. If you're mass producing the same standard product, okay, there's very little variation, the costs are going to be quite low. However, the second you start adding in different features, okay, new colors, different sizes of the same product, now you need to allow for that variation, and it's going to increase your costs as well, because now you might need a separate machine that cuts things slightly larger, or colors things a slightly different color, okay? The third V is variation in demand. Now, we've looked at this in terms of volume as well. However, with variation in demand, when there's an increase in demand, it will, of course, require increased inputs. And whilst the decrease in demand is going to cause a reduction in the hours worked by people because they're not required, and there's reduced productivity. Okay, now, demand can be predicted based on seasons or points of interest. So, for example, I've got a little wavy graph on the side there. Now, let's use this as an example of flowers. Okay, a florist. Okay, so when there's moments of peaks, well, they can predict and say, well, that's Valentine's Day. Okay, traditionally a lot of flowers. The next peak will be Mother's Day, traditionally a lot of flowers. And the troughs, so the dips, they'll say, well, okay, between Valentine's Day and Mother's Day, or between Valentine's Day and Christmas, for example, there's very little. Okay, this could also be fruit. Okay, during the moments of peaks, it's when it's on season, and during moments of troughs, it's when the fruit isn't in season. Okay, but using seasons or points of interest can help a business work out when is demand going to vary. When should we start looking at our flexibility and our lead time in terms of either increasing our level of inputs or decreasing our level of inputs? And then finally we have visibility. Okay, now visibility is also known as customer contact. Okay, basically how this shapes the transformation process is this feedback can affect the process because customers and their preferences shape what businesses make. Okay, as we looked at in the previous video here when we looked at inputs as customers as a transformed resource, they ultimately decide what businesses make. It's their needs and wants. Okay, now there's two different types of contact. Okay, customer contact or visibility here. There's the direct contact, which is through surveys, interviews, warranty claims, letters, actually asking customers directly. Okay, or there's indirect, so looking at sales and sales data and market share. Okay, so the little barcodes on products, when that gets scanned at a supermarket, that data goes back to the business, and they can look at it and say, okay, well, how many people purchase this product at this point in time? Is it good? Is it bad? What can we do? And that is a form of customer contact. Now, if we're going to look at them in a scenario here in terms of which one, little variation of these four, what does that mean for a business? Okay, so we'll look at these sort of on a spectrum between the lowest cost per unit on the left-hand side and the highest cost per unit to produce on the right-hand side. So if we were to have limited customer contact, so very little actual contact with what customers want, that reduces costs because you're not actually putting in any resources to find out what they want. Limited product variety, so you're only making one product, and high volume, you're churning it out at an extreme amount of numbers, so a couple of million at a time. Okay, so this is a standardized mass production approach. That leads to the lowest cost per unit because you're not having any extra costs involved in having slight differences in the product or only making one product because it brings your costs down. The next one will be limited customer contact, limited product variety, again, just like the first one, but low volume. So rather than making a mass production, you're only making batch production, so small amounts at a time. So while the costs are low, they're slightly higher than if you were to make them in bulk, so a mass production approach. Then we have extensive customer contact, so you're really putting a lot of resources into finding out what people want. Extensive product variety, so you have a lot of variations in what your product actually is, or a lot of different versions of it, and high volume, so you're still mass producing here, so you're making a lot of these products at a time, one at a time, at the same time, so it brings the price per unit down, or the cost per unit down. And then finally, the one with the highest cost per unit to produce will be one with extensive customer contact, extensive product variety because you have a lot of differences in your product, you have a lot of contact with the customers, but low volume. So rather than mass producing something, you're doing this in at a small scale. Now, this, for example, would be for a service. It might be taxes. You can't mass produce taxes. You can't have 100 people in a room with you and you do all their taxes at the same time because you need to tailor it to an individual person. So there's extensive customer contact. You're with them personally, physically. There's extensive product variety because no one tax return is going to be the same. And there's low volume. You're doing one at a time. So that's going to have the highest cost per unit. This also works for products as well. Personalized products that customers might might choose to have, monogrammed or embossed with something particular to them, that will then bring the cost per unit up to produce. Well, this is the end of the video. The next video in this series looks at sequencing and scheduling, Gantt charts, and the critical path analysis. However, I hope that this video on the 4 V's has proven valuable. Thank you.